This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Ryan Tripp back from spring break with you here. We got ourselves a great pod for you. CBS Sports has released the never too early college football playoff contenders from the Big Ten for 2025. Is your school a contender? We will discuss. We got two promising young quarterbacks with bright futures here in 2025. One former Big Ten quarterback raves about a guy that could be really hitting the spotlight here in 2025. I'll tell you who that is and why. And maybe, Tripp, maybe we can save spring games here on the pod. We'll tell you an idea that maybe could turn around this trend of spring games getting canceled. But first and foremost, welcome back. I don't know if it's a lighting. You do look a little tan here, so at least it seems like spring break was a success. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it treated me well. And like so many of these college football players across the country, now I'm back and rearing and ready to go. As one thing you didn't mention, spring practices are starting now across the country as we gear up for the much anticipated spring games at some Big Ten schools. I do say and that.
There's no sarcasm there. Yeah. That seems like you are
you just
dead
serious sarcasm there. Yeah.
Oh man, spring football underway. So like you said, for a lot of schools here, we'll dive into that. We talked about spring storylines to watch last week, so go check it out on YouTube and also wherever you get your pods. Still Enrolled is where to search. But that is maybe what people would consider fake football or practice football. Let's talk, Tripp, to start the pod, real football here. Even though St. Patrick's Day was on Monday, even though March Madness has yet to start, it is never too early. We had opening day for baseball on Tuesdays. Well, never too early to look ahead to 2025, your favorite thing to do, and project ahead months in advance. But CBS Sports did put out here a list of college football playoff contenders from the Big Ten in 2025. They have 5 teams on the list here. Let's give them to you and then react to them. In no order, they have, shockingly, Ohio State as a college football playoff contender. Oregon has made the list. Penn State has made the list. The other two, Illinois, and drumroll, please, the Michigan Wolverines are the 5th and final team, according to CBS Sports here, that is a college football playoff contender from the Big Ten. Your initial reaction, Tripp, to this list is what?
Well, first of all, it's not too early to talk about 2025 now. It was too early to talk about it when you wanted to, seconds after the national championship game concluded, while you were still sitting inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium, right, as we broke down Ohio State defeating Notre Dame to win the 2025 college football. Do you call it the 2024 college football playoff or the 2025 college football playoff? Because it did finish in January of 2025, but it was the 2024 season.
I go by the season. Because it's not hockey, it's not basketball where you literally have the season carry over from one year to the next. I get the championship game technically was in 2025. I despise how they have the logos of the year that it's in. It's a 2024 season. No one thinks when you say, hey, who's a 2025 champion 10 years from now, people are going to say, okay, 2025 champion, that was a 2024 season, Ohio State. It's too confusing. 2024 champion, Ohio State. 2023 champion, Michigan. 99% of the games were played in that season. That's what I refer to.
So they almost just need to use Roman numerals. So, because like when I think of it, I think of the Super Bowl 52 or Super Bowl 59 champion, Philadelphia Eagles. Anyway, to get back to your question, talking about if I'm surprised by this list of 5 contenders for the Big Ten, I would probably add a 6th. But otherwise, no surprises as who are to make the top 12. Sure, give me those 5 teams. But I'm going to add a 6th team to this list.
You're going to keep us waiting in suspense? Who would you add?
I'm going to add the USC Trojans to the list.
Ooh. You would, huh? You're believing in the recruiting. You're believing in the transfer portal. You're believing in the newfound direction the Trojans have. Interesting. Okay, let's dive in that here in one more second. But at least looking at the 5 teams, I think it's interesting because
hold on. Are you rolling, before we dive into it, are you rolling with the 5 or are you changing that number?
So realistically, I think there's 4. I would change the number from 5 to 4. I think the top 4 we said: Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Illinois. For me right now, when I look at Michigan, I have a few questions. And I thought it was interesting because in this article by Tom Fornelli of CBS Sports, he included, and this is more his assumption, this is not, I guess, maybe from the mouth of Sherrone Moore. We got a long way to go between now and week number 1. But he's assuming because Sherrone Moore came up under Jim Harbaugh that they would adopt a similar philosophy when it comes to Bryce Underwood's playing time as they did with J.J. McCarthy, which, if you go back to 2021, was Cade McNamara, right, starting most of that year, and J.J. McCarthy kind of coming in and playing some limited minutes. He believes, at least Fornelli, that is, that Mikey Keene would start for Michigan and then work Bryce Underwood in, and maybe he becomes a starter midway through the year. If that's kind of the game you're playing, I don't think, for me, like, that's going to all of a sudden rejuvenize Michigan's offense and get them to the point where they can now go win 10 or 11 games and be a playoff contender. If that's kind of be, you're going to go the slow development route, I think that's going to kind of lend Michigan more to win 8-9 games and be out of the playoff picture. I would have them right now on the outside looking in of a college football playoff berth, or at least saying that they contend for a playoff spot. I would put the number 4, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Illinois. I would draw a line there and then put a few other teams below them.
I think with a 12-team playoff, it's unfair just to draw the line at 4. That's why I added USC to the mix as well. And we can dive deep into it, and we probably will, looking at schedules, because obviously we saw how a schedule imbalance, I think, perfectly positioned, not take away from what Indiana accomplished last year with Curt Cignetti in his first season. They had a talented team with a veteran quarterback coming over from the MAC who had won a lot of college football games. So ultimately, when I come up with my list of how many teams can do it, I'm at 6 teams, and I'm including USC, not because of what they're doing in recruiting. Like, that doesn't impact to me 2025 as much. The portal, yes. They just lost so many close games. They're competitive. They're still not, you still can't tell me the overall talent on USC's roster isn't good enough to be a top 20 college football program. They were still plenty good enough to be a top 20 team last year. We saw some of the performances they put together, taking Notre Dame down to the wire in the fourth quarter, taking Penn State to overtime, beating LSU. Like, they're there. They're in that conversation because of the talent they have. So I'm putting it at 6 teams just based on the overall talent of the rosters. So I am including Michigan in it because, look, it's a 12-team playoff. You get 1 or 2 breaks to go your way. We just saw you don't have to be a 1-loss team. You don't have to be a 2. You can be a 3-loss team and still be very much in contention for the college football playoff based on the perception of what your program's done, who those losses are to, what type of games you play in, and the overall strength of your league. And there's no question the Big Ten, I think, coming off this past season, is the best conference in all of college football right now. So I think when you look at the talent of the teams, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, obviously, Illinois, the momentum of last year, and then just the potential and talent on the rosters of Michigan and USC is why I make that case. Now, you may ask, well, if you're going to say that, why aren't you saying that about Indiana? Look, a lot of turnover after year number 1 and number 2. I will go a little bit deeper with the Hoosiers. They benefited from an imbalanced schedule and a down Michigan team in 2024. Indiana this year opens their Big Ten slate at home against Illinois. Now, that game may define which of those 2 teams legitimately has a chance to be a contender in 2025. But the next 2 games after that, at Iowa, they do get a bye, but then at Oregon. And then they still have to go to Penn State in November. So for those reasons alone, turnover on roster and schedule, I feel like Indiana's probably on that cusp of, hey, we're knocking on the door. We're not there, though. You know, they're the Michigan of 2024. They're the USC of 2024. They're maybe the Washington of 2024. So I feel like talent, just looking at talent, it's obviously the 3 teams we talked about all last season. Hot, momentum, Illinois, everything that Brett Bielema's got going, and then Michigan and USC should be in that mix just based on talent alone and the ability. If it was a top 8, a top 4, I'm not talking about Michigan and USC. But being a top 12 with what they have on their roster, I don't think it's impossible that they make it to this play to be a contender, right? The question is, how many Big Ten teams are contenders? I think they're contenders to get there. Will they? We'll see. But I think they're contenders to get there.
What scares me about USC, I agree with you about the talent. They do have a lot of talent. They've had a lot of talent.
Yeah.
I get concerned about the coaching. You cite, and you're right.
Very
fair.
A
lot of close games.
Very fair.
But I think good coaching will help. Like, I don't think it's just, okay, we lost 4 close games last year by a score. Now we're almost due or owed those 4 games this year. I don't think it works like that in the sense of if you don't change anything. And I feel like we've talked about with Lincoln Riley with a few of those losses last year. Like, USC lost because they tried to win a certain way. They didn't go based on how the game dictated the game should go. It's, hey, I'm an air raid guy. I'm a quarterback guy. We're going to throw the ball a lot. We're going to throw to win. Even if it's not working, we're not going to change. You were there on the sideline against the Penn State game in overtime. For 2.5 quarters, USC was dominating. They were ripping Penn State apart on the ground, and it felt like in the second half, they changed their game plan, and that allowed Penn State to get back in the game. If they just kept at it, who knows? But it feels like Lincoln Riley sometimes gets away from what's working, especially in the ground game, to try to win in a certain way in his head until he proves that. I agree they have the talent. I just don't know that the wins will follow in terms, or at least match up with the talent that they have. And then plus, we've talked about and given them a lot of credit on the recruiting trail. And they do deserve credit for the changes they made. They brought in Chad Bowden. And it seems like now they have a real emphasis on kind of building USC into a Big Ten caliber team in the sense of beefing up the O-line and the D-line. The question I have on top of the coaching is, well, how quickly can those impact players, come in and start and make their impact felt? A lot of good freshman recruiting so far looking up. How many of those guys, though, especially at least in 2025, can come in right away and make an impact? That's a question I have as well for USC, which is why, at least for me, when it comes to contender right now in March, I would leave them off.
But your focus always comes back to Lincoln Riley and the offense. And it is a USC program that obviously has had some great offensive players, and they've had Heisman Trophy winners on the offensive side. If that defense can continue to make the exponential growth it made from last season to this season, the same way they did from 2023 to 2024 by bringing Danton Lynn over from UCLA, maybe the defense takes a little bit of pressure off that offense where they don't have to score 30, 35, 40 points a game to win. Like, I believe in Danton Lynn. They did a lot to keep him at USC because there are obviously other schools, including Penn State, that were targeting Danton Lynn for their coordinator positions. So I think it's not always just about Lincoln Riley. And I think we get wrapped up and fascinated with him because he's a big name. It's LA, it's glitz, it's glamour. He's the head coach. He's this quarterback guru, quarterback whisperer, pick your adjective there with Caleb Williams. And he's the guy in charge, ultimately, that fails to run the ball when they're running the ball successfully. But I view it as, I wouldn't sleep on Danton Lynn and the growth of that defense again and taking a little pressure off that USC offense. Look, it's way, way, way too early to dive in and do X's and O's. And okay, this is what their depth chart's going to look like. This is where I feel like they stack up compared to an Oregon and Ohio State, a Penn State now. But I think to keep a team of that caliber off a contender, a very, very generic contender list at this point of the year would be very naive and silly to do. So that's just why I'm lumping them in as a 6th team. I think you're just a little more specific with yours and coming down to 4 teams. For me, look, the 4 you're picking might be the 4 that have a chance not only to go to the playoff, but advance in the playoff. And look, there's still a lot to be said about Illinois. How talented are they? But in terms of, does a team got a chance? Yeah, they got a chance.
The last thing I'll say just for USC, because we've mentioned the schedule, I think it has in part. This is tough for the Trojans here. I just want to read you the road games. At Illinois, now early in the year, so it won't be too cold. You're at Notre Dame middle October, at Nebraska in November, at Oregon. Late in the season. Plus, by the way, Michigan does come to town about middle of the year. You, at least in terms of beefing up the O-line and D-line, you're going to need that help immediately with some of those teams that you're playing, and especially some of those road environments and road teams you're going to play. That's going to test the toughness of USC, no doubt about it. Since we're kind of talking about Let me throw one team here your
Mhm.
way. In terms of maybe I can expand my, horizons past 4 contenders.
Yep.
We talked about them last year. I took the bait. I was very wrong. I'm going to try to double back down again. How about Nebraska? When you look at now year 2 of Dylan Raiola, I know it's a new system because Dana Holgorsen, right, came at the end of the year and what was a very bizarre move, but now he at least has been there all off season. You've upgraded your receiver room in terms of bringing Dane King and Isaiah Hunter, 2 guys that at least have proven it at Kentucky and Cal respectively. We talk about schedule. I think schedule now is maybe more important than ever with how big it is and how much the disparities can either help or hurt a team make the playoff. You look at Nebraska, they have Michigan. We just mentioned USC. They have Iowa. All 3 of those games, though, at home. Their biggest road game is at Penn State. So at least the tough games they have, most of them are in Lincoln. Any thought here on maybe looking at Nebraska, not as a shoe-in here, but maybe out at least right now in March, I would take a Flyers. You know what? That's a team I'm kind of not in the 4, concrete 4, but I think they're on that second tier on the radar. If they could be a team in November, like, oh, wow, look at them. They have a path here.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. And look, it's year 3 of Matt Rule. What did he do at Temple in year 3? 10-4. What did he do at Baylor in year 3?
Very good point.
11-3. After a 5-7 season in year 1 at Nebraska, 7-6 last year, ending it with a win in the Pinstripe Bowl. Does he get to double-digit wins with the Cornhuskers? Look, the history of Nebraska football for the last decade would say otherwise, that they're kind of stuck right now. And I felt, if I felt like last year was a growth process for Dylan Raiola, and that even if the results weren't there, the program was trending in the right direct, like everything was aligned.
Right.
Head coach, quarterback, OC, QB coach, identity of the program. No team was more active in the Big Ten than Nebraska in the portal. That's a lot. That can be a really good thing, or it could be a bad thing. Like I thought coming out of last year, Nebraska should be at the point of, all right, we got our quarterback. We can see what the future holds. I came away perplexed at the end of last season. Hey, we're going to make all these changes. Yeah, we're going to try to get better in the portal. They lost some big guys too. It's not just big additions. They had some players who played pretty critical roles depart. And I think it's really, and I know we talked about this with Oregon at the beginning of the year. We talk about it with splashes made in the portal all the time. I personally and Indiana proved somewhat differently last year. Then again, Curt Cignetti had a lot of connections and relationships and continuity built over from those players that came with him from James Madison to Indiana. I think sometimes too much portal is a bad thing. I think it can hamper you. And to put Nebraska in that conversation, I think is short-sighted based on the program that they've proven to be ever since they moved on from Bo Pelini. I'm not comfortable with it there. If everything was aligned, regardless of record, and you could see the progress of Dylan Raiola, you could see, we had a bad game here, but here's a good game, a bounce back. Like I know it's not always going to be a smooth trajectory, upward trajectory. Mm-hmm. There's going to be peaks and valleys, but I felt like there's too many valleys and too many questions coming out of last year with the lack of continuity on the staff, the roster, and the management of their quarterback. I am not comfortable with putting Nebraska in that spot.
I can't disagree in the sense of there were a lot of peaks. It was a roller coaster for Dylan Raiola. He needs to take a big step up. Dana Holgorsen, it seems, while it was unconventional, we'll say, in terms of the timing of the hire, I think at least Matt Rule on paper got that right. You bolster the receiver room here. It's going to be on Raiola. I think, again, Nebraska's future is going to be dependent on him in general, especially this season.
But it may also still be unrealistic. I mean, here's still 19-year-old second-year quarterback in the Big Ten. He's still only a sophomore. I think sometimes the expectations on guys like that are a little unrealistic. Like for him to carry, it's one thing as a freshman or a sophomore to go into a program like an Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan of 2 years ago, Penn State, where there's established continuity surrounding you and everywhere there with you. In the case of Nebraska, you're putting a team that had a 6-7 record the prior year and saying, oh, just because we're getting a quarterback, he's going to ascend us to the promised land. I think that's unfair. I think the expectations placed on Dylan Raiola have been unfair.
Speaking of which, I want to circle back to some of the big schools. We mentioned Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Illinois, and really have not dove into them. I want to circle back to that because I think there's something there. But to your point about expectations, young quarterbacks, it's the perfect segue here to talk about a guy in Bryce Underwood, Trip, who does not lack any hype whatsoever. And usually, right, hype comes from people outside the program, people like you and I, people like, beat writers that look at him and put all these expectations on a player that's not really proven it yet. Well, Bryce Underwood, I don't want to say he did himself no favors, but I want you to listen to this. He was on the Rich Eisen show last week. Rich asked him, hey, what's your legacy at Michigan going to be when it's all said and done? Take a listen to Bryce's answer.
Your legacy. What will your legacy be, do you think? A couple Heismans and at least one natty.
Couple Heismans and at least one natty. You mentioned expectations, realistic expectations. We're talking about Dylan Raiola here, at least for 2025, Trip. Realistic expectations for Bryce Underwood should be what?
Well, it's hard to say because as you talked about at the start of the podcast, maybe it will be Mikey Keene at quarterback with his relationship with Chip Lindsey from Fresno. Here's the thing. Bryce Underwood is oozing of talent. There is no question he is as highly, just watching and reading. And I'm not a quarterback evaluator by any stretch of the imagination, but where there's that much smoke, right, there's fire. And everyone that's talked about him, everyone that's evaluated him, you look at his numbers, you look at what he did at the high school level, you look at where he's kind of ranked, and we went through that a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. It is just really hard for me to see a freshman with the defenses that they'll play against in the Big Ten. And, to go against a Jim Knowles, to go against a Matt Patricia, to go against these elite defensive coordinators, right? Who have schemed against the very best at all levels in the game. I question where Bryce Underwood, and maybe he's got enough natural talent to overcome that and surpass that. I think as a freshman to expect a Heisman, as a freshman to expect a natty, and I know he didn't say that. He said during his tenure at Michigan. I would, if I'm a Michigan fan, if I'm a college football fan, I think the guy's going to be probably great at some point. But to expect it day one in the Big Ten is really unrealistic.
And you look at their schedule, we'll see when he starts, but even if he does start week 1, well, you got a week 2 trip to Oklahoma on the road. Should be a raucous atmosphere. You're at Nebraska, you're at USC, Ohio State comes to town end of the year. You got a tough schedule here, especially some tough road games and some hostile environments. You add that along with the fact that, you look back in, let's say, the last 10 years of college football, really outside of Trevor Lawrence at Clemson, there's been no true freshman, not a first-year starter, but a true freshman coming in that hits the ground running, that, has his team at or near championship level right away. There are bumps in the road. It may not be as up and down as Dylan Raiola as what we just saw in Nebraska, but you look at what he's coming into. We just saw Michigan last year have the 130th ranked passing offense, only ahead of Army, Navy, Air Force. So you are coming into a passing offense that is beleaguered. Even though you do have some players coming back, it's not like you have some top tier talent that has proven it at Michigan before, to where you can that makes your adjustment easier. You have a new running back, you got some new receivers. Honestly, Trip, if we're talking about Michigan having a top 50, just top 50 passing attack, which you go back to last year, is about roughly 230 yards a game. If you can get that from Bryce Underwood for most of, if not all of 2025, I would consider that a win. Like I'll take that here. I don't think there's expectations of playoff or him coming in and being a Heisman contender. I mean, do the math. He's probably going to be there 3 years. He wants to win 2 Heismans. There's 1 year he's not going to. It's probably going to be year number 1. But like if we're talking about a stat line, Bryce Underwood in December, 20 total touchdowns, 13 interceptions, I think that's a win for Michigan.
You hit on a real key point right there. And I don't even know if you hit on the key point. There can be redshirt freshman quarterbacks. There can be sophomores that are first-time starters, but true freshman quarterbacks, it doesn't really happen in college football to have that type of success. Look at all the hype around Arch Manning.
Sat for 2 years.
That, to me, is the big difference here. Is he hasn't played yet. He hasn't been in a college system. He hasn't been through the work. I don't mind your 20 total touchdowns, 13 interceptions line. I just wonder how, if that is his stat line, how good would that make Michigan? Here's the thing with Michigan. Like, all the attention is going to be on Bryce Underwood. Then you mentioned running back, wide receiver. What were the 3 worst position groups for Michigan last year?
Receiver, quarterback,
offensive line.
I was between offensive line and running back.
Receiver, quarterback, offensive line. So you're telling me a true freshman quarterback, if he wins the starting job, is all of a sudden going to put up big numbers, where the 2 worst position groups on the team outside of the quarterback position last year were wide receiver and offensive line? Now, they got, a couple of transfers on the offensive line, have a couple of guys coming back, but I don't know that that's an immediate fix, especially in pass protection. And then wide receiver, Samaj Morgan's a decent player. Fred Moore, they have experience playing at that level. The transfers coming in, Anthony Simpson was at Arizona, transferred to UMass, had a great year in 2023 at UMass. Probably a lot of garbage time. I'm just going to guess his 57 receptions, 792 yards, 3 touchdowns.
You tell me UMass wasn't playing in competitive games?
I'm just going to guess. And then he played 3 games last year before redshirting. Donovan McCauley, who comes in from Indiana, 6'5", 200. Great. 48 catches, 644 yards, 6 touchdowns in 2023. Only 2 catches last year. I don't think there's a quick fix there at wide receiver. I don't think there's, I don't expect Michigan's offensive line to all of a sudden be the best offensive line in college football again next year. So to ask Bryce Underwood to do it with deficiencies at probably the 2 most critical positions for a quarterback to have, unless they can lean on a strong run game, and use his legs, because he is a dual threat guy. As a passer coming in as a freshman, I'm not saying he's not going to be successful, because I think he is a difference maker if he wins the job. But there's going to be bumps along the road.
Absolutely. And you look at Chip Lindsey coming in, at least, I guess the good news for Michigan is you hire an offensive coordinator that is a guy that preaches balance, running the ball well and throwing the ball well. So it's not also going to be on Bryce Underwood's shoulders, which I think is good, especially early on. But that, I think, also means a lessened stat line, because they're going to try to really establish the run first. Probably, again, lessen his plate, lessen the pressure on him. When there aren't dynamic playmakers around you, you kind of almost in a way have to shelter your quarterback. And that goes back to the conversation we just had to start the pod of I can't put Michigan in the cultural playoff contender category, at least right now, because there are a lot of questions that are unanswered. The schedule is pretty difficult. And we're talking about a true freshman quarterback in a world where, sure, the hype is there, but you rarely see true freshman guys have big impacts. Again, look at Dylan Raiola. He was a 5-star guy. It's not like he was, this unheralded player. It was a big get for Nebraska. Year 1, you mentioned the roller coaster. He had 13 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. I think Underwood can do a little bit better than that, but to sit here and then, I think the floor, is it fair to say, if Michigan's a true college football playoff contender, we're talking about 10-2, right? Regular season. I think it's if somehow things break out and you're talking about a 9-win team on the fringe, I don't think you can assume that. Maybe it works out the way, but just to be safe, 10 wins is basically the floor to be a college football playoff contender. To have a true freshman, even if he doesn't start or maybe especially if he doesn't start the year, and then you kind of got to go through those learning curves later in the year with some tough road games, I think you're asking a lot and setting him up for failure in year one. If we're sitting here thinking he's going to be the savior for Michigan football with, like you just outlined, all the questions they have around him. The hype is there, but yeah, I think we got to pump the brakes at least for 2025.
Let's circle back to the other 4 teams that we really didn't debate, that you and I both felt like are legitimate college football playoff contenders out of the Big Ten. Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Illinois. Ohio State, right? Tough schedule, a lot of different faces. The road games are Washington, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan. They get Penn State at home.
That's tricky. Those are tricky games.
But it's Ohio State. Are we all in the wrong? And like I've seen in the way too early prognostications, right? Ohio State either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like they're a top 5 team going into 2025. Is that wrong based on new OC, new DC, new quarterback? You're replacing all but 3 starters on defense. Just because Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Day are coming back and it's Ohio State and they got a ton of talent, is it wrong to have them as a top 5 team going into 2025?
Yes. Right now, yes. I think they have to prove it. Just because they've lost so much and when you have so much turnover, not just on the field, but in the coaching staff as well, I don't think you deserve the benefit of the doubt when, right, the polls are supposed to be but my point is the polls are supposed to be just about this season, right? 2025. So in theory, when you're ranking teams, 2024, 2023, et cetera, are irrelevant because all you're doing is ranking teams based on how they look and play in 2025.
No, I really disagree with that. Like, I think Oregon and Ohio, like Oregon's the same way, right? They lost a ton of players. They lose a quarterback who came to Eugene with 50 starts. Bo Nix had all that experience when he came to Eugene. And now Dante Moore, who's played 9 starts in his career. They lose running back, receivers, offensive linemen, tackles, D-line. Like, I think Ohio State, though, and Oregon, because of the talent, the coaching, and where they're now both in that conversation of Georgia, Alabama kind of had been the last couple of years. Ohio State and Oregon are the same way. No matter who they have, you just assume they're going to be there. So I think you can't discount 2023, 2024, 2022, 2021. Like, Dan Lanning, Ryan Day, Oregon, Ohio State are different than any other team in the Big Ten in that you do just give them the benefit of the doubt. And no matter that roster turnover, they are there as contenders. So I disagree with you just disregard and look at this season. I'd say for other programs, even a Penn State, even a Michigan, they might not be at that level yet. But because of the outstanding success that Oregon and Ohio State have had, I think they have earned the benefit of the doubt. Now, would I put them as my favorites for the Big Ten of 2025? Probably not. But they definitely deserve benefit of the doubt to be a top 10 team going into that season. And that also means they're college football playoff contenders.
Well, I would say top 10. I wouldn't say top 5. I think they're definitely top 10 team, both squads. But in terms of like top 5, like I think when you look at like what Penn State brings back, what Clemson brings back, like I do think like you have to weigh that versus just, oh, well, this is the reigning national champs. I've heard this argument on the radio this past week, at least in terms of basketball and also applied to football. Like, oh, they're the reigning champs, so they should be number 1. But if you lose 80% of your roster, then no, like it's a new season. I get there's a respect level for sure, but I don't think it's unfair to say Ohio State, with all the churn they have to replace and so many unproven players on the field and off the field, coaching wise as well, you know, being in the fold here, I don't think it's crazy to say if they're number 8, 9, 10, whatever, that they have something to prove. Like Texas is coming to town week number 1. Texas should be ranked higher than Ohio State. They have more proven talent coming back. There's less turnover. Like that to me is not a hot take or crazy.
But here's the beauty of it though. Now, Ohio State was ranked what going into the playoffs? 8, 9. Right. So now you just need to be at your best at the end of the year. So even if you have a young team, you can have a slip up against Texas. Absolutely. It doesn't matter as long as you are at your best at the end of the year. You don't Oregon, you don't want to be number one all year long.
That's interesting, though, because you do look at Ohio State, right? We looked at last year.
And maybe that's the story.
Talented team.
And I don't mean to cut you off, but maybe that's the story when you start looking at Michigan and Bryce Underwood. Like, hey, if they can just find a way to get to the playoffs, all of a sudden at the end of after playing 13 games, he's not a freshman anymore, right? Maybe that's the conversation you start having, because a team that's young doesn't have to go 12-0 to make it to the national championship. A young team that's ascending only has to go 10-2, maybe 9-3 if you get a little lucky. Like, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be great all year. You got to survive. And then when the time comes, you have the opportunity to thrive.
Right. Ohio State losing to Texas week 1, not a death knell whatsoever. What is interesting is, at least when you do kind of look at the urgency, you just mentioned Ohio State last year as an 8 seed because they went 10-2 in the regular season. You look at the schedule, I feel like 10-2 is fair to say. Again, you met at Washington, very tough road game, at Illinois, at Wisconsin, at Michigan, Penn State at home. Like, almost half their schedule is going to be against tough teams, either at home or on the road in the Big Ten, along with Texas. 6 of the 12 games they have could be against ranked opponents, with 4 of the 6 on the road. Like, that is a tough schedule to wear. If we're talking about Ohio State team at 10-2, the point I'm trying to make here is it's going to be a lot harder for that team this year, I think, to win a title versus last year, just because we saw the insane talent that they had and they got hot at the right time. If you're 10-2 again this year and you have a lower seed, I don't think, in least terms of benefit of the doubt, that team deserves it, but it's going to be.
But how many of the top 4 teams made it to the semifinals?
0.
Yeah.
0. It was a crazy year. Crazy year. The parity is good. That's, I guess, if you're Ohio State, what you're looking for, but the path definitely is a little bit more difficult. And we'll see, by the way, as we record this. I mean, it's college football, so things change all the time. Maybe they'll change the seeding rules between now and September 1st. That's been a discussion. Nothing seems momentum-wise going there, but that could also change it. But a few other teams here to mention, because Oregon, like you said, right, same boat here, a lot of inexperience. Dante Moore coming in, which that's going to be interesting, too, with their offense, just because they're so used to having veteran quarterbacks and Bo Nix, Dylan Gabriel, who have come to Eugene with a lot of experience. Outside of 1 year at UCLA, that was very up and down for Dante Moore. He is very inexperienced, by far the most inexperienced quarterback that staff is working with. We'll see how quickly they can hit the ground. That game against Penn State, end of September, on the road is going to loom pretty large there, at least in terms of trying to get your guys ready to go pretty early on in the season. You look at Illinois, though, Tripp, and maybe for those listening that are surprised Illinois is kind of like a shoo-in for the contender list, Illinois, 3rd in the country in terms of returning production in the nation. Their offensive line's intact, and they got an experienced starter outside of Drew Aller, Luke Altmaier, only other 3rd-year starter at quarterback, at least, in the Big Ten. The Illini, man, I like the production they have back. They are an exciting team. By the way, you get your 2 toughest games of the season, Ohio State, USC, both at home. You mentioned earlier that Indiana game on the road end of September that can really define and kind of be maybe the fork in the road for both those schools. Toughest games at home. Returning production is one of the best in the country. Experienced quarterback. This is by far the best year or best chance Illinois has had since the college football playoff was created to make the playoff here. And good for them. And I think it's rightfully so. They are in this conversation and one of the locks to be a contender, at least in 2025.
It's weird saying this, though. For them to truly be a contender in 2025, what are the 2 areas they have to be better than they were in 2024? Running the football and on the defensive line, which have been hallmarks of Brett Bielema's teams. Like, they were able to overcome a mediocre run game. They still wanted to run the ball. They still did run the ball, but they made big plays at the wide receiver position from 2 outstanding wide receivers on the outside to help Luke Altmaier. And, I think the defensive strength was their secondary last year. I feel like they could be better in the run game and on the defensive line. And if those 2 elements come together to support what they have returning at the other positions, then I think Illinois really becomes dangerous.
And then you look at Penn State here as the last one, right? We've talked about the returning production for them. They get, at least in terms of having 2 tough games in Oregon and Ohio State, at least one of them's at home in the Ducks. If you could win that game, you obviously give yourself some big-time breathing room when you go to the shoe in early November. I think for Penn State, right, you look at them, it's forget being a playoff contender. It's national title contender. That's the goal. That's the expectation. That's a thought here for 2025. I mean, if we're talking about them not even making the playoff. You talk about disaster. It's like Ole Miss from last year where you felt like they were a shoo, and all of a sudden at the end with all the guys coming back, they can't make it be one of the 12 teams. It would be an absolute disaster in Happy Valley.
I think Penn State may have the most hype, but also the most pressure and most expectations of any team in the country going into 2025.
I totally agree. I think it's deserved on both ends, the hype and the pressure. Because
I think I don't love the word deserve because I think you earn it, right? Like I think they've put themselves in a position where they earned the hype. They kind of earned the expectations because they've been knocking on the door. Now it seems like all the stars have aligned. They follow that Ohio State, Michigan model that everyone's discussed. So I don't view it as a bad thing all the time where, okay, we expect it now. Everyone expects it. Hey, this is your chance. Go do it. For a program that has been clamoring to be mentioned among the likes of the Ohio State, Georgias, Alabamas of the world. Here it is. So now it's just making the most of that opportunity. And I think they've earned that opportunity because of what James Franklin has built at Penn State. So I don't love the word deserves there. I actually think they've earned the expectations and the hype.
And if you're a fan listening to that and saying, oh boy, I'm nervous, like that's, it comes with a lot of pressure. The alternative is, well, you have no expectations because your team sucks. Like I'd much rather have pressure of winning a championship versus, well, 2025 is a write-off. Maybe if we make a bowl game, that'd be good enough. Like they say, there's a bunch of cliches of pressure, so I'll save you. Mm-hmm. But I agree. That's fair. It is definitely earned. And it's if you can spin it the right way, I think it's actually a positive for them to have this pressure because it means they have put themselves in a position to where they should attain the ultimate goal fans chase for, and that's a national championship. We talked about expectations, Trip. We've talked about young quarterbacks here, especially going back to Bryce Underwood. Let's go to Minnesota, where they could have a promising quarterback really explode onto the scene here in 2025. And that is one in Drake Lindsey. He's not a true freshman like Bryce Underwood. He was there under Max Brosmer last year as a redshirt freshman. And I want to play this from the Y option. Friend of the pod, Yogi Roth, had Max Brosmer on. And Brosmer was raving about what Minnesota fans, Big Ten fans, can expect from the Gophers QB here in 2025.
The first thing that I noticed for him was he reminded me a lot of myself when I was younger, like his crave for knowledge and like asking questions. And that's not taught. That's kind of just who you are as a person. And so that was the biggest thing I noticed right away was this kid, like he wants to know every single detail. He's asking me who, like he may not even think I'm that good coming from New Hampshire, but he's asking me every single little detail about different concepts and stuff that I ran in New Hampshire and stuff that we're doing in Minnesota, like as from a perspective of my own. Like he wants to know everything. And that's why he's grown so much to where he is today. And even as a freshman, like on the field, throwing the ball, the first thing I noticed about him was his innate ability to layer and anticipate as a freshman, which is, again, something that's kind of just innate. And like it's taught along the way, but he has it already. And so that's really cool. Throwing wise, you have to see this next year. It'll be absolutely incredible in my opinion.
That's very high praise coming from a guy who was extremely accomplished at New Hampshire and then had Minnesota. I mean, look, they weren't necessarily a playoff contender, but them, a lot like Illinois, 1-2 games, swing their way, really competitive all year long, great defense. I thought their season got off to a bad start, losing that game at home to North Carolina because they missed the field goal at the end. They make that. We're probably having a different conversation all year about Minnesota. There's some pressure on PJ Fleck to have like a big breakthrough year, but they've been quietly, they've been in the top half of teams in the league. Certainly not in that upper echelon, not a contender to win the league, but they're good. Is this the guy to help elevate them to be beyond just good? But I'm not saying elite, not saying great, but maybe really good. And 6'5", 235 pounds. He was a 3-star quarterback. He was the 23rd ranked quarterback coming out in his class 2 years ago. He played in a couple games last year, but to hear that praise from that guy, but this is a different type of quarterback, right, than Max Brosmer. This is a big, strong-armed, athletic kid. I there's a lot of buzz around him. Like we don't talk about Minnesota a ton, but for some reason, this name keeps popping up. And I'm really curious about what Drake Lindsey in Minnesota can do going into 2025. Yeah, it's interesting right now. There's some real buzz there.
I think the buzz is real. I think if you're a Gopher fan here, I think you should pay specific attention to Illinois here, because I think your goal is to be Illinois in 2026, maybe even 2027. And I think Lindsey could be a big part of that, because what you hear about Max Brosmer a lot is his preparation. And there's some great features done all across the Big Ten about how much Max Brosmer studies. And he basically is a coach on the field. You watch him play, right? He's not the most athletic, not the most mobile, doesn't have the best arm. His best attribute is his mind. And so for him to be there in 2024 and to have Lindsey basically right under him, learning and basically following his every step, I think if you mentioned the size, he's got a rocket arm. You've heard Max just talk about his ability to throw the ball, layer, and kind of have some pretty high-level quarterback abilities early on, despite being a true freshman in practice last year. If you can blend the physical tools that Lindsey has going to Minnesota here and the preparation and answers that Max Brosmer had for every scheme the defense threw his way, and you could put that into one, I think you're talking about Minnesota kind of being like Illinois here in 2026, 2027, where there's legitimate, not just, okay, that's a tricky game on the road, we got to keep our guard out because they're kind of one of those scrappy teams that could get us. This could be, hey, this is a team that is a playoff team here in 2026. Like, this is a team that is one of now, Minnesota becomes one of the hardest games on your schedule in a year or two if Lindsey can live up to the hype. But I'm like, you hear Max Brosmer is not a guy that I think just is talking out of his ass or hyping up a guy that doesn't deserve it. This seems real. He was studying with him all year last year. If his preparation meets the talent and skill that he has, Minnesota's gonna be a fun team. I think not just I think he can hit the ground running in 2025, but then beyond that too, when you talk about bigger expectations, Minnesota's on the rise here. They feel like a fun team the next 2 or 3 years. It's gonna be very interesting. Lindsey's gonna be one of those guys too. Watch during spring. Watch during training camp. Zach Pyron came in from Georgia Tech, so there's going to be some quarterback competition there as well. But if he can reach and exceed the buzz that he has, Minnesota's going to be one of those teams I think we're talking about, like Illinois here in a few years for sure. Speaking of spring football, Trip, let's finish up the pod with this, because we've talked a lot about spring football, spring games specifically, right? Should it be saved? What's the point anymore? We've seen a lot of teams cancel them. I want to play this from Deion Sanders, who had the idea I've never heard of, but it's fascinating. Maybe this from Deion could save spring football. Take a listen.
You never know if this is going to be the last spring game. I don't believe in that. I don't really want to condone that. I would like to play the spring. Actually, I like to play against another team in the spring. That's what I'm trying to do right now, to have it competitive. Playing against your own guys kind of get monotonous, and you really can't tell the level of your guys because, you know, it's the same old. Everybody kind of know each other towards the end. I would like to style it like the pros. I would like to practice against someone for a few days, then you have the spring game. And I think the public will be satisfied with that tremendously. I think it's a tremendous idea.
It's interesting. It's different. I don't think I'm on board right now. And just from the sense of, with the season going longer here, where we're just talking about the playoff ending less than 2 months ago, if you're looking at it from the spring perspective here, basically having a joint practice, I would just be afraid of injuries, honestly, Trip. I don't think, at least right now, you need to have a game against whoever. I saw Syracuse responded to Deion Sanders' comments, saying, we'll come to Boulder. So, you know, if you're Ohio State, are you going to scrimmage Boston College? Like, you know, if you're Michigan, are you going to bring Miami of Ohio in? I think it's a decent idea. I just would honestly be more afraid of injuries in the spring and this unnecessarily putting some more wear and tear on bodies versus a controlled environment, at least of spring football and spring games. What do you think about that?
I think anytime a player steps on the field, whether they're playing and competing against their own teammates or in a spring game setting, there is the risk of injury. So for me, the injury part isn't a big deal. It's what you hit on first. This is already such a long season. Asking players to start the last weekend of July, beginning of August, going through a grueling training camp, and what has gone from a 12-game season to a 13-game season to now a 17, 18-game season. It is asking a lot of the players. It is asking a lot of the coaches. And it's asking a lot of the schools financially, the resources, what they can do. Look, there's probably some way to generate revenue out of this here. Our TV would eat it up having spring games against two teams. But what do those games look like? The model that Deion, to me, is discussing is the joint practices and OTA sessions that you're seeing across the NFL, or a joint practice in a training camp. To me, I'm okay with that. If you want to go and practice and go compete head to head, and you find, however this calendar ends up shaking out, we talked at length about changing the model, getting rid of spring football, change the model, what an off season looks like. Maybe there is a week at the end of June where you have joint practices with a regional school, like Penn State's going down to West Virginia. Ohio State's going to go to Notre Dame.
Wow, you're going big time here.
Just trying to keep it regional.
Interesting.
I don't have a problem with that. I do like Deion's idea. I do. I'm just curious how it fits in the current landscape of the sport, where not only do you have winter workouts, spring ball, pro day, draft, spring camp, spring game, finals, classes. I just don't know how it fits. I like the idea. I really do. I love it. But it seems like a component of that idea, the joint practices, could be something that could be built into an evolved college football calendar, as opposed to, hey, let's save spring football. Let's save the spring games. We're going to scrimmage another team, and we're going to do it on television and do it for 2 hours in an actual game format, as opposed to the skills drills or whatever else we're getting to see now.
I guess maybe that's where this conversation is maybe more nuanced, and maybe you have to split it, into two parts, where joint practices and like kind of that idea is one thing, and then the other idea is scrimmaging someone for a spring game and have that be the replacement to kind of save spring football. I guess in that perspective, the second one here, looking at saving the spring game, two things. Number one, I just don't know if playing Miami of Ohio or Akron is saving spring football. Like, are you more or less likely to go to a spring game if it's your own team, scrimmaging each other versus, Akron's coming to town, we got to go? I don't know how many, honestly, fans and schools would care about, even TV networks would care about that. I'm assuming you do a lower level school just because I think they'd be more into it.
But they're talking here, Syracuse and Colorado. That's 2 Power 4 teams.
Right. Well, but also I guess you got to think about it from a I hate going down this road. I'm sorry, but I think we have to. From a financial perspective, is Ohio State giving up a spring game to go play at Colorado so they can fill their stadium? I think if you're the Big Ten, right, you're assuming you're going to get someone to come to you. Maybe there's an ACC school willing to do so. Maybe there's a Big 12 school or one of the 2 Pac-12 schools willing to do that. But I think for the most part here, I don't think if you're Purdue, you're like, okay, let's go play spring football.
No, it's college football. Put it at neutral sites. Everyone loves neutral site college football.
God, that's true. Let's get it in Georgia. Let's get it at the Mercedes-Benz Dome here, where everyone loves to play neutral site games.
Ultimately, it's a conversation that probably has too many prongs, too many different roads and pathways to go down to truly give an answer. If I thought the sport, and you can do a home and home to solve the home versus away problem, but if I thought the sport should really save spring ball, I like Deion's suggestion. But I don't think saving spring ball is the best thing for the sport. So the joint practices as a part of some sort of off-season program in a controlled environment, probably the best way to go here.
The only thing I'll say that maybe could help save spring ball, could save college football, is this. If you do that, right, and you basically open up your program, forget fans. If you open up your program to another school, no matter who it is, I think maybe the reason why schools do it would be, okay, there's no spring transfer portal window. Or maybe that window is tightened. Like,
hold on, we didn't even get to this yet. If this happens, if Colorado were to scrimmage Syracuse, and a couple of Syracuse players really stand out to the Colorado coaches, whether it's an open spring game, an OTA, a joint practice, there will be some behind the curtain conversations. hey, you really stood out today. Why don't you come over and join? Like, I think in the current volatile nature of college football, you don't want you're probably not going to want another program around you because you'll be worried about your players. I mean, we're not even going to play spring games allegedly because you're worried about the players being poached because there's a play of them going 75% airing on TV, probably against air at that. But then you're going to invite another staff and program into your building, your facility around your players. I mean, you're just opening the door. All of a sudden, that Syracuse, New York to Boulder, Colorado pipeline was.
That's my point. But like, I agree in the sense of like, if we're doing that,
it's not, and that's not a joke. Like you're telling me that, like, look, Max Clare went from Purdue to Ohio State. You're telling me at some point during the handshakes after the game, conversations, agents, family members, that, and I'm not pointing fingers and saying it's that school, they broke rules, right? But you're telling me at some point that conversation didn't happen. And that's any school, any player, any team.
Look at Dylan Tiedemann going from Purdue to Oregon. As soon as he committed, what went viral? Dan Lanning postgame raving about how good he was. I'm with you. It's not a coincidence. I get, okay, that happened in October. This would happen whenever. Now it happened in June. There's a little more runway, I guess, if you will. But at least if that's happening, I think that means the portal window has changed, which I would say is good for college football. Mm-hmm. You're not doing it in spring practice when, like you said, there's an easy legal way of, hey, next week the portal opens. If you jump in there, we can maybe give you an offer. No, because even, by the way, it works the reverse. If you're Miami of Ohio going to Ohio State, one receiver stands out, all of a sudden that guy's gone. So there's really right now no incentive for any school to do it from either, a lower level school going to a big school or vice versa. There's no incentive for you to do it right now just because, again, it's so easy to lose players. Basically, you're showing them off for free. Mm-hmm. But if that day happens, what Deion Sanders is talking about, joint practices and a scrimmage for just in the spring football in this time window, I'm assuming then that means the day has come where the spring window is closed. And at least for this upcoming season, you don't have to worry about your players getting poached. Next year, different story. But at least for that upcoming season, you don't have to worry about, hey, we're going to go to Ohio State and we may lose our linebacker because he's going to stand out and these coaches can be like, well, you're really good. Come over here. At least you don't have to worry about that per se. But that adds there's so much nuance and there's so much that has to be worked out here that makes it look, it's different. I give Deion credit for creativity, but that's, I guess, the overall frustrating part about college football is there's usually a million different ways to say no to an idea that could actually help the sport. That's the world we're living in.
Yeah.
What a way to end the pod. Jeez, usually we're both pretty positive people here. It's a nice sunny day out. Spring is in the air. And here we are ending on a negative note of good things maybe not coming to the sport that we do love.
You were telling me before that even though you live in New York City, where there's an Irish pub every other block, maybe actually every block, you didn't even do anything for St. Patrick's Day?
I did not. I was working yesterday. My parents and sister marched in the parade, so I kind of ran down before going to work to see them just before.
There's a parade?
There's a huge parade. The New York City St. Patrick's Day parade is massive.
Even it's on a weekday?
Weekday. Oh, it's every day except Sunday. They were observed the religious holiday, so last year was on a Sunday. They moved it to Saturday, so there's a big celebration on Saturday. But yeah, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, doesn't matter. It was packed. Let me tell you, there were plenty of people that did not do what I did. And that is work on Monday for St. Patrick's Day. I will say, there's an Irish pub literally 5 feet away from where I live. Mm-hmm. After work,
well, of course, it's New York City. Yeah, there has to be.
I did go get a late night Guinness, just one. Mm-hmm.
Did you get split the G? Spirit.
Plastic cups. It was packed. You're not going to give out glass cups on a day like that where people are coming in pretty intoxicated. So unfortunately, it's plastic cups. I think I got pretty good at it, though.
Hold on. Hold on. You're so mature. People are coming in intoxicated. Like, come on. Like you didn't roll in ever in your time. They're pretty intoxicated. More like, yeah, they all just rolled in drunk. They're out there with their buds. Got that buzz.
Well, I'm a mature man now.
We have grown so much that we are now mature professionals.
Where we are judging other people getting drunk on a national holiday.
I agree. I also did absolutely nothing. So I sat on my couch and worked and prepared for this and baseball games tonight. And yeah.
We're in our festive green as well, as you can see. So we're in the St. Patrick's Day spirit. At least we got a green background on YouTube they can look at that makes us, a little more festive as well. But good things are happening here. Spring football's underway. Weather's turning. A few spring games that are still around will be happening soon here. So we still got a lot more spring storylines to break down and get you set here for as we head closer and closer to the start of the 2025 season. Make sure you are subscribing on YouTube and also wherever you get your pods. Still Enrolled. Very simple. Search that. We will pop up right there. The green logos where you can click to subscribe and make sure you don't miss an episode we have coming your way every single week. Enjoy the rest of your week. We'll talk to you next week right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.